And that, my dear Zix-9, is precisely why we members of the Galactic Confederation believe humans to be the most fragile species in the known universe, I concluded, puffing out my chest feathers with pride, satisfied with my thorough explanation. Zix-9's tentacles wriggled, likely in confusion. But C-Core, if humans are so fragile, how have they survived this long? And why are they allowed to join deep space missions? I couldn't help but release a series of sharp, staccato calls that passed for laughter among my species. Oh, you naive hatchling, they're not allowed on deep space missions, they insisted on coming along. And, well, have you ever tried arguing with a human? It's like trying to teach a Vorex slug quantum mechanics, pointless and messy. Zix-9's eye stalks drooped slightly. I don't understand. Perhaps you could elaborate? I sighed, my beak clicking in mild annoyance. Very well. Let me tell you about my first encounter with a human. It's a tale that will ruffle your ear tentacles and make you question everything you thought you knew about the universe. It all began aboard the Galactic Confederation's premier research vessel, the Celestial Squirk. I had just been promoted to chief xenobiologist, a position I had been eyeing since I was barely out of my egg. The ship was abuzz with excitement, or, in the case of the bands, literally buzzing because we were about to welcome our first human crew member. Now, you have to understand, Zix-9, at this point humans were still a novelty in the Confederation. We had only discovered their little backwater planet a few cycles ago. And most of us thought they'd be better off left alone to figure out how not to blow themselves up with their primitive nuclear weapons. But no, someone in Confederation High Command thought it would be a fantastic idea to invite one of these barely evolved primates onto our most advanced research vessel. For diversity, they said, and for interspecies cooperation, they chirped. I personally thought it was for their own amusement, but who was I to question the wisdom of our esteemed leaders? So there I was, standing in the docking bay with the rest of the senior staff, waiting for this human to arrive. I had studied their physiology, of course it was my job. After all, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of a human in the flesh. Meet Dr. Caw, our alien narrator, and his preconceptions about humans. The airlock hissed open, and in waddled the strangest creature I had ever laid eyes on. It was taller than me, and I'm considered quite the towering specimen among my kind. But where I was covered in sleek, aerodynamic feathers, this thing was naked, pale pinkish skin stretched over a frame that looked about as sturdy as a flipper gibbet. Hello everyone, it said, its face contorting into what I later learned was called a smile. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, your new xenolinguist. It's an honor to be here. I leaned over to my colleague, Dr. Screech, and whispered, Great Nest Mother, it's even uglier than the holograms. How does it even stand upright without a proper tail? Dr. Screech's feathers ruffled in agreement. Forget standing, how does it survive without proper plumage? One solar flare and it'll be cooked faster than a Zorad in mating season. The human Dr. Chen was making her way down the line, shaking appendages, tentacles, or pseudopods with each crew member. When she reached me, she extended her hand, 5 writhing digits splayed out like some sort of mutant starfish. Doctor. Caw, I presume, she said, still wearing that unnerving smile. I've read all your papers on avian-like species across the galaxy. Fascinating work. I reluctantly touched my wingtip to her hand, half expecting it to crumble under even that gentle pressure. Yes, well, I muttered, I'm sure you'll find our work here quite advanced compared to what you're used to. She laughed a strange, melodious sound that made several nearby chitter-chats scurry for cover. Oh, I'm counting on it. I can't wait to learn from all of you. As she moved on to traumatize Dr. Screech with her bizarre greeting ritual, I couldn't help but think that this was going to be a very long mission indeed. The arrival of Dr. Sarah Chen, first impressions and alien confusion the first few days were, to put it mildly, an adjustment period. Dr. Chen seemed determined to integrate herself into every aspect of ship life, despite our best efforts to keep her safely contained in her quarters. Take mealtimes, for instance. The first time she walked into the mess hall, you'd have thought a ravenous bug-bladder beast of Triel had appeared. Conversations stopped mid-squirk, mandibles froze mid-chew, and I'm pretty sure I saw a gelatinous blob start to dissolve itself in sheer panic. Hi everyone, she chirped, seemingly oblivious to the terror she was inducing. Mind if I join you? Before anyone could formulate a polite refusal, she had already plopped herself down at our table, right next to poor Dr. Screech, who looked like he was about to molt on the spot. So she said, unpacking a container of what looked suspiciously like biological matter, what's on the menu today? I managed to find my voice first. Doctor. Chen, we weren't expecting you. Surely you'd be more comfortable eating in your quarters with your special dietary needs? She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't worry about me. I brought my own lunch. I hope you don't mind, I'm dying to learn more about everyone's cultures. And what better way than over a meal? With that, she popped something into her mouth and began to chew. Right there, in front of everyone, is she. Grinding her food, whispered a horrified Bizian at the next table. With bones in her face? I tried to distract from the gruesome spectacle. Dr. Chen, perhaps you'd like to tell us about your work in xenolinguistics instead? Her eyes lit up, and she launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her research, pausing occasionally to shovel more food into that terrifying maw of hers. I have to admit, despite my initial revulsion, I found myself becoming intrigued. Her theories on cross-species communication were not entirely primitive. As the days went by, the crew slowly began to adjust to Dr. Chen's presence. Some even started to seek her out, curious about this strange, fragile creature that seemed so eager to learn about everyone else. I, however, remained skeptical. Surely it was only a matter of time before the harsh realities of space travel proved too much for her delicate human physiology. My fears seemed to be confirmed when, about 2 weeks into the mission, we encountered an ion storm. Now, for most of us, ion storms are a minor inconvenience, a bit of static in our feathers, scales, or exoskeletons, maybe some mild disorientation for the more sensitive species. But for a human, I was certain this would be the end of Dr. Chen's little space adventure. As the alarms blared and the ship rocked, I made my way to her quarters, already composing the somber message I'd have to send to Confederation High Command about the tragic loss of our human crew member. I keyed open her door, bracing myself for the worst. Surviving the ion storm, Dr. Chen's unexpected workout routine. Dr. Chen, are you— Oh, hi Dr. Craw, she called cheerfully from where she was hanging upside down from a bar attached to her ceiling. Just getting in a quick workout while we wait out this storm. Did you need something? I blinked, my nictitating membranes working overtime as I tried to process what I was seeing. You're exercising? Now? She dropped to the floor with a grace that seemed impossible for her bulky form. Sure, no sense in wasting time, right? Besides, in microgravity, you've got to stay active or you lose bone density. Didn't you know that? I most certainly did not know that, and I wasn't about to admit it. But the ion storm, aren't you concerned? She shrugged, a strangely fluid motion for a creature with such rigid shoulders. Nah, it's not so bad. Reminds me of the thunderstorms back home. Kind of soothing, actually. Soothing. She found an ion storm soothing? I began to wonder if perhaps we had underestimated these humans after all. But it was the events of the Zorks incident that truly opened my eyes to the surprising resilience and, dare I say, usefulness of our human crew member. We had stopped at a remote outpost to resupply and allow some of the crew to stretch their wings, pseudopods, or whatever passed for limbs among the more exotic species. Dr. Chen naturally insisted on joining the shore party. Are you sure that's wise? I asked her as she prepared to disembark. The atmosphere on this moon is barely breathable, the gravity is 5 times what you're used to, and the local flora is less than friendly. She grinned. I had finally stopped flinching at the sight and patted the environment suit she wore. That's what this is for. Come on, Dr. Craw, where's your sense of adventure? I ruffled my feathers indignantly. I'll have you know that I have participated in 17 first contact missions and discovered no less than 32 new species. Great, she said, clapping me on the back hard enough to make me squawk in surprise. Then you'll be the perfect guide. Let's go. And so, against my better judgment, I found myself waddling across the barren landscape of this forsaken moon. Watching Dr. Chen bounce along beside me with an enthusiasm that bordered on the manic. We had barely made it a kilo span from the ship when we heard the first roar, a sound that chilled the blood of even the most hardened space explorers. The mating call of a Zorks. I hissed. We need to get back to the ship now. The Zorks incident, a close encounter with a fearsome predator, but it was too late. The Zorks burst from behind a rocky outcropping, all 15 meters and 2 tons of it, 8 legs propelling its armored body forward with terrifying speed, while its 4 sets of mandibles clacked in hungry anticipation. Back to the ship. I screeched, spreading my wings in preparation for a hasty retreat. But when I looked back, Dr. Chen wasn't following. She was just standing there, staring at the charging monstrosity. Dr. Chen, I called. What are you doing? Run. She glanced back at me, a strange glint in her eye. No need, she said calmly. I've got this. And then, to my utter astonishment, she began to wave her arms and shout at the Zorks, not in terror, mind you, but in what seemed to be a challenge. "Hey, big guy," she yelled. "Yeah, you with the ugly face. You want a piece of this? Come and get it." The Zorx, clearly as confused as I was, actually slowed its charge. It cocked its enormous head to one side, mandibles twitching in what I can only assume was the Zorx equivalent of a bewildered expression. Dr. Chen took advantage of its hesitation. She bent down, picked up a rock, and with a motion I can only describe as unnaturally fluid, hurled it at the creature. The stone bounced off one of its compound eyes with a satisfying thwack. The Zorx let out a bellow of pain and surprise, and then in defiance of everything I thought I knew about these fearsome predators, it turned tail and ran. I stood there, beak agape, as Dr. Chen dusted off her hands and turned back to me with that infuriating smile. "Well," she said, "that was exciting. Shall we continue our survey?" From that day forward, I began to see Dr. Sarah Chen and humans in general in a new light. Yes, they were strange, often bafflingly so. Yes, they lacked many of the natural defenses that other species took for granted, but they possessed a resourcefulness, an adaptability, and a sheer bloody-minded determination that was, well, almost admirable. Over the course of our mission, Dr. Chen continued to surprise us. She mastered alien languages with a speed that left our linguists baffled. She came up with innovative solutions to engineering problems that had stumped our best minds for cycles. And perhaps most impressively, she managed to broker peace between the perennially warring fluffbutts and scaly tails, apparently by introducing them to something called karaoke. Void whales and Mozart music as a universal language, but it wasn't until our encounter with the void whales that I truly understood the unique perspective that humans could bring to our galactic community. We were charting a new sector of space, far from any known civilizations, when we encountered them massive creatures, each the size of a small moon, drifting through the vacuum as if it were an alien ocean. Our sensors could barely comprehend them. They seemed to exist partially in our dimension and partially elsewhere. The entire crew was in awe. These beings defied classification, defied understanding. We had no protocol for this situation, no precedent to fall back on. As the senior scientist on board, all eyes turned to me for guidance. I was at a loss. We should observe from a distance, I finally managed to say. Record everything we can, but under no circumstances should we attempt to make contact. We have no idea what these creatures are capable of. Dr. Chen, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "But isn't that why we're out here?" she asked. "To make contact? To understand the unknown?" I ruffled my feathers in agitation. "This is different, Dr. Chen. These beings are completely beyond our comprehension. We can't possibly communicate with them." She smiled, that same infuriating smile that I had come to realize meant she was about to do something either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, often both. "Maybe we can't communicate in the traditional sense," she said, "but I have an idea." Before anyone could stop her, she was at the communications console, her fingers flying over the controls with a dexterity that still amazed me. And then, to the shock of everyone on the bridge, music began to play. It wasn't like any music I'd ever heard before. It was human music, a rich, complex tapestry of sounds that seemed to ebb and flow like the very fabric of space-time around us. Later, she told me it was something called classical music, a piece by a composer named Mozart. As the music filled the ship and spilled out into the void, something extraordinary happened. The void whales began to move not away from us, as I had feared, but in a pattern, a dance, I realized with a start. They were dancing to the music. For hours we watched in awe as these incomprehensible beings swayed and swooped to the human melody. Dr. Chen kept the music playing, cycling through different pieces, each evoking a different response from our enormous audience. When it was over, when the void whales finally drifted away into the depths of space, there wasn't a dry eye or equivalent sensory organ on the ship. Dr. Chen turned to me, her own eyes shimmering with moisture, a sight that no longer filled me with disgust, but rather a strange sort of affection. "You see, Dr. Krakaw," she said softly, "sometimes understanding doesn't require words. Sometimes it just requires a willingness to reach out." I nodded, for once at a loss for words myself. In that moment, I understood something profound about humans and about the universe itself. There would always be things beyond our comprehension, beings and phenomena that defied our attempts to classify and categorize. But that didn't mean we should stop trying to connect, to communicate, to understand. Humans, I realized, embodied this principle in a way that few other species did. Their very fragility, their lack of natural defenses, had driven them to develop an unparalleled ability to adapt, to think creatively, to reach out and find common ground with the utterly alien. The Galactic Safety Council showdown bureaucracy meets human determination, so you see, Zix-9. I said, coming back to the present moment, humans may be physically fragile, but they possess a strength that goes beyond the physical, a strength of spirit, if you will. Zix-9's tentacles wriggled in what I now recognized as excitement. That's incredible. Craw-caw. But what happened next? Did you change the Confederation's policies on human involvement in space missions? I let out a chuckle caw. Oh, my dear Zix-9, changing galactic policy isn't like molting a feather, it's more like trying to redirect a black hole with a feather duster. But yes, things did change, albeit slowly. I settled back, ready to regale my young friend with more tales of human audacity. You see, word of our encounter with the void whales spread quickly. Soon, every research vessel in the fleet was clamoring for a human crew member. It became something of a status symbol if you had a human on board. It meant you were on the cutting edge of exploration. Zix-9's eye stalks perked up. But surely not everyone was happy about this. I mean, from what you've told me, humans seem rather unpredictable.
I nodded sagely. Ah, you're sharper than a razorbeak's talons, Zix-9. Indeed, there was significant pushback from certain quarters, the Galactic Safety Council, in particular, threw an absolute fit. I still remember the emergency meeting called by the Council representatives from every major species in the Confederation were there, their plumage, scales, or bioluminescent patches puffed up in agitation. High Councillor Sork, a venerable old bird with feathers so white they seemed to glow, called the meeting to order with a sharp cry. Order. Order in the Council. His voice echoed through the chamber, causing several of the more sensitive auditory apparatuses to wince. We are here, he continued, his tone grave, to address the growing situation regarding human involvement in our space exploration programs. A chorus of squawks, chirps, and various other vocalizations filled the air. I caught snatches of conversation. They're a menace. Did you hear what happened on the Starfire? A human sneezed and shorted out half the computer systems. I heard they need to consume dihydrogen monoxide regularly, or they'll die. Dihydrogen monoxide. Do you know how dangerous that is? I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Yes, humans had their quirks, but this was getting ridiculous. I was about to speak up in their defense when the chamber doors burst open. In strode Dr. Sarah Chen, looking as out of place in this gathering of galactic dignitaries as a flame breather in an ammunition depot. But she held her head high, meeting the startled gazes of the council members with that now familiar determined glint in her eye. Esteemed members of the council, she said, her voice clear and strong, I understand you have concerns about human participation in Confederation activities. I'm here to address those concerns. High Councillor Sork ruffled his feathers in indignation. Now see here, young human, this is a closed council session. You can't I? Dr. Chen interrupted, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As I understand it, according to Confederation bylaws, any sentient species involved in official Confederation activities has the right to representation at council meetings pertaining to their involvement. Or am I mistaken? The chamber fell silent. You could have heard a nano feather drop. I had to stifle a laugh. Trust a human to out-bureaucrat the bureaucrats. High Councillor Sork's beak opened and closed several times before he finally found his voice. Well, yes, technically, but excellent, Dr. Chen said, striding to the center of the chamber. Then let's talk about why humans are an asset to the Confederation, not a liability. Dr. Chen's impassioned speech. Changing minds across the galaxy, what followed was one of the most impressive displays of rhetoric I've ever witnessed. Dr. Chen addressed every concern, every fear, every wild rumor about humans with facts, humor, and an unwavering conviction. Yes, humans needed to consume water regularly, but so did many other species. And humans had developed highly efficient recycling systems that actually improved water conservation on long space voyages. Yes, humans lacked many natural defenses, but this very vulnerability had driven them to develop advanced protective technologies that were now being adapted for use by other species. And yes, humans were unpredictable, but this very unpredictability had led to breakthrough discoveries and diplomatic resolutions that no one else had thought possible. By the end of her speech, even the most hardened skeptics were looking thoughtful. High Councillor Sork cleared his throat. Well, Dr. Chen, you've certainly given us much to consider. But I must ask why? Why are humans so keen to join us in space? Your planet is not under any immediate threat, you have ample resources. Why take the risk? Dr. Chen's smile softened. Counselor, have you ever stood on a beach on Earth, looked up at the night sky, and felt small? Humans have been doing that for thousands of years, and for just as long, we've been dreaming of reaching those stars, of understanding the vastness of the universe and our place in it. She gestured around the chamber. Look at all of us so different, from so many worlds, and yet here we are, working together to explore the greatest frontier of all. How could we not want to be part of that? There was a moment of silence, and then, to my amazement, High Counselor Sork began to laugh, not the polite titter of diplomatic amusement, but a full-throated, beak-wide-open guffaw. Oh, my dear, he said, wiping a tear from his eye with a wingtip. I do believe we've been thinking about this all wrong. We've been asking whether humans are fit for space exploration. Perhaps we should have been asking whether we're fit for humans. And that, 6-9. I said, coming to the end of my tale, was the turning point. Oh, there were still debates and adjustments to be made, but from that day forward, humans were accepted as full partners in Confederation space exploration. 6-9's tentacles were practically tying themselves in knots with excitement. Wow, so humans really changed everything, huh? I nodded, a fond smile creasing my beak. They certainly did. And they continue to surprise us. Why, just last cycle, a human scientist proposed a method of faster-than-light travel based on something they call spaghettification. Absolute madness, of course, but... I trailed off, noticing 6-9's sudden distraction. Following their eye stalks, I turned to see what had caught their attention. Striding down the corridor toward us was a human young, by their standards with a shock of brightly coloured hair that seemed to defy several laws of physics. They were whistling a jaunty tune and tossing some sort of small spherical object from hand to hand. As they passed us, they grinned and gave a little wave. Hey, Dr. Craw, beautiful day in space, isn't it? I found myself returning the smile. Indeed it is, Dr. Zhang. Indeed it is. As the human continued on their way, I turned back to 6-9, whose eye stalks were now stretched to their full extent in astonishment. You see, my young friend, I said, unable to keep a note of pride from my voice. That's the thing about humans. Just when you think you've got them figured out, they'll surprise you all over again. And speaking as someone who's spent a career studying the diversity of life in this galaxy, I can tell you there's no greater gift than that. 6-9's tentacles wriggled in what I now recognized as agreement. I think I understand now. Craw. Humans aren't fragile at all, are they? Not in the ways that really matter. I let out a soft chuckle caw. No, 6-9, they most certainly are not. Now, how about we go see what strange and wonderful thing that human is up to? If there's one thing I've learned, it's that where there's a human, there's bound to be an adventure. And with that, we set off down the corridor, ready for whatever the universe and our human crewmates might throw at us next. After all, in a galaxy full of wonders, sometimes the most wondrous thing of all is a species too stubborn, too curious, and too full of dreams to know when they're supposed to be fragile. The universe, it turns out, has a way of making room for such creatures. And we, the Galactic Confederation, are all the richer for it.